Hey Dan.
Hey Reed.
Okay, so for today's show, I would like to give a shout out to the Slay podcast, the SLAYYY. They call it
Mm-hmm.
Slay. To Ben, Bill, and Brian. They're doing a great show over there, and I
Yeah.
really enjoy hearing what they have to say.
Yeah. They just got started a few episodes ago. I think number, they're ready for number 4, I think will be their next.
Yeah. So I'm
So
Reed
yeah.
Riggs, pronouns he, him.
And I'm Diane Neubauer, she, her.
And today, I think I'm going to lead, right? The topic is
Yes.
about communicative purpose.
Yes.
Communicative purpose in the context of our language classrooms. I think we can delve into purpose outside of classrooms as well. I like to make an
Mm-hmm.
effort whenever I'm wondering or questioning, um, are we really using the language? Are we really communicating? Are we really doing something meaningful? I try to avoid the word meaningful. I feel like it's been overused and it's a little like it's so watered down that I don't often know what
Yeah, it
people
can
mean when they say it.
meaningful
Yeah.
means anything. Yeah.
It becomes that with so many different uses, or people, they'll often say it with like an emphasis, but without a definition. They'll be like, no, no, no,
Right.
the student should do something meaningful. And I'm like, you gotta give me something
You
more
got to
than that.
define that.
You gotta
Yep.
define it for me. Yep. So,
Should we define communicate too? Because
well,
that one gets,
yes, yes, and I want to add to the definition through examples, and we'll do that throughout
yeah.
the entire episode. I think the purpose of the purpose of this episode about purpose, um, what I want to do is offer the definition and offer a little history with why we're talking about this. But then do what we do on our show is just jump into our experiences and our perspectives and our opinions,
Mhm.
and through doing so, allow people to pick and choose some sort of broader definitions and some
Mhm.
more clear, I think more clear definitions. Um, so let's start with that. So over the last, I think since 2017, when Bill VanPatten published While We're on the Topic, we've
Mhm.
seen a lot of people repeating the definition of communication that he gives in that book.
Yes.
It's
Which he took partially from the work of Sandra Sauvignon in the
yeah,
70s. So
yeah.
it's been around for a while, but it's kind of renewed in its popularity through that book. I see that as the
My
citation a lot.
Yeah, my understanding is that she didn't give it as like, hey, everyone, here's a definition, use this definition. It was something that I think she kind of said in passing, and but
Yeah, I
then
think
people
more
people
so.
used it. They were like, oh, that's hey, look, a definition. People started using it. And so Bill Van Patten, it's like page 3 in his book, and he's
While we're on
it's
the topic. Yep.
while we're on the topic, published through ACTFL. And I'm gonna do my best to quote it, but I'm still gonna call it a paraphrase
Hmm.
because I'm not looking at it.
Hmm.
The communication is the expression, the interpretation, and the sometimes
Sometimes
negotiation of
negotiation
meaning, mhm,
in a
in a
given
given
context
context. And then he says it, period. And what's more, communication is
is
purposeful.
purposeful.
And so people often kind of paraphrase that as in a given context for a given purpose. And on the same page, he breaks down the words. He breaks down what he means by context. He breaks down what he means by purpose. And then he spends a few more pages getting into those. So I don't have it in front of me, and I don't plan to focus this whole episode on exactly what he said. I do recommend people go dig
Yeah.
into that. It's useful and it's neat. And I've seen people since then taking from that also his he has like he's like 2.5 purpose examples or definitions. So he says you can have
Yes. Which
psychosocial
is
purpose,
things like being
greetings,
chit chat,
chit chat,
greetings,
greetings.
just kind of I've called it polishing relationships with people where you're talking to them not to really get something done or find something out so much as just like, hey, I know you.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great day it is today. And actually, it really is here in
Yeah.
Indiana where I am.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
the one that I've often watched other people do, which stands out to me because I don't follow sports, is when people go, "Hey, what a game. Yeah, what a game. Yeah, what a game. Yeah, what
Yes.
a game." They're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
did you write down at the last like, oh, I know. Yeah,
Yeah,
write down to
exactly.
there. Yeah, and since last year, I know since last year." And it's like
Yeah.
there's so much in the know, they're not sharing any information. And this is how I see the difference between psychosocial that he talks about in his book there, and then his second one, which is cognitive informational, and it's that there is information being shared. And I think that's the
Yeah.
kind of divide between the way he breaks it down is that Is information being shared? If yes, cognitive informational. If no,
Yeah.
psychosocial.
Yeah. So
Um,
information about each other, perhaps too, like, hey, where did you grow up? And
yeah,
so
yeah,
that's, even though that could be like relationship building, it's still finding out something new that you didn't know
yes,
before.
yes,
But it could also be information about science, about history, about geography, about some subject matter or content area,
yeah,
if you're thinking classroom, especially.
yeah.
So,
And
um,
in the micro interaction, like the turn by turn, if the teacher says, um, where did that person go next? And the teacher genuinely doesn't know. And then the students say, he went to Beijing. Oh, really? So the students in that moment are contributing some kind of information to a story. And in that moment, that would we would call that psychosocial because no, sorry, we would call that cognitive informational because information is being shared. Um, so then the third one would be entertainment. And he gives examples of doing stand-up comedy. And he says, am I really sharing information when I do stand-up comedy? Um, I think the vagueness there is the problem in itself, is that you're not looking at the actual turn-by-turn interaction when you just talk about a
right.
general example. When you say, I do stand-up comedy, that's not itself an example of turn-by-turn. What words exactly did you say to the audience? And I think that when I've grown up watching stand-up comedy since I was in middle school, watching Comedy Central in the 90s. Um, I think most of that would fit his definition of cognitive informational when they're saying like, oh, the other day I saw this guy and this thing happened to me. Like, oh, there's information, there's information that the audience didn't yet know about the events that happened to that person. And so
Right.
you could do that. But then there are other moments where it's you're saying things that people already know and they kind of laugh because they're like, oh, I identify with that. Yeah, I identify with
Yeah.
that. So we might call that psychosocial. Um, I think what I
Yeah.
want to kind of get down to is like those are useful categories. They're definitely useful categories, and those are fine. Those three. So
Yeah.
psychosocial,
Can
building
I,
relationships. Yeah, go ahead.
before you go on too far, can I put a little caveat on that entertainment thing? Because I was saying this summer at some teacher events too, and where I think like I absolutely want to count that as a third category, but I don't want to call it the same thing, but it overlaps with the concept. Like I think entertainment gets treated like it's this lesser thing. Um, and and I think it can, and I think Bill VanPatten pointed out, it could get abused a little bit in a language classroom if you're thinking, well, we're playing a game, they're doing flashcards and identifying vocabulary, and like they'll maybe confuse that for actual communicative purpose, which it's maybe if you're using the language to talk about the game that you're playing, then that part of the language use is communicative. But the thing that I like to think of it as is like the episode we did on language play. So we're doing something imaginative or we're doing something that's not apparently to learn something about each other or the world or just greetings. It's more than that, but it's yeah. So I definitely want to count that
Yeah,
as a real purpose.
for sure. Yeah, and I'm reading a book right now called Language Play by David Crystal. And I'm only into the first chapter right now, but he lays out what the purpose of his book is, and he says the majority of what we do with language with other people, not the majority, but it's a, an important part, like a very important part, is just having fun.
Yeah.
And
And we count
and
like storytelling that way too.
yep,
Or like you do sometimes learn something from it. You definitely gain perspective and empathy from hearing stories from other people. But
yeah,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
and it's not always about humor and laughter too. Like
right.
yeah, so you might be talking with someone about um hey, wouldn't it be neat if I was the boss of the company? Like, oh yeah, yeah, man, you'd be well, maybe this is often for laughter, but I don't know. There are a lot of things that we
Right.
do where we use language where it's just to have a nice time. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. So I think that what is useful for us in classrooms is to not get too hung up on something as an end goal, like when we say like, oh, there's no purpose to this because there's no like end product to the thing we're doing. I think it's really useful
Hmm.
to look at purpose also at the very micro level to say, um, is this going somewhere? And so an example of less purposeful, or the purpose of learning language is always present in a language classroom. But then the question is, are we doing more than just learning language? And so an example is when I was in Spain, the teacher would call on each of us we were sitting in a U shape, and we each had our homework in front of us from the night before. And the teacher would call on each of us in turn to read out our homework answer. And she would either say yes or no to like the language accuracy. And then she'd move on
Hmm.
to the next student.
Yeah.
Nothing was there was no attention to the information of our answer. So if it was like, um, Dana and Steve like to go to the beach on the weekend and they drive their car to do that. Okay. The next student, Bill takes a new camera that he just bought for taking pictures on vacation. So I wrote a little article for White Teasel where I call these sandcastle topics. And a sandcastle is something that looks like a structure. It looks like it's one cohesive, coherent thing, but it's not expected to stand very long, and it quickly
Hmm.
washes away into little grains of sand.
Yeah.
Um, and so it looks like we're talking about vacations. And
But we're
that was like,
not.
that's how it's organized on a page in a textbook. It's like, now you're talking about vacations. These people did this thing on a vacation. Those people did that thing on a vacation. Um, but if you look
But
at,
it's going nowhere.
it's going nowhere in terms of like what happened to Bill, what happened to the first people we talked about. We'll never talk about
Yeah.
them again. What about the second people we talked about? We never talk about them again. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's evidence of what I would like to talk about as purpose being lacking here. There's a lack of purpose where whatever
Yeah.
information I shared is no longer, is never connected with anything ever again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would call that lack of purpose there.
Yeah. And the way I've described it to people in a teacher training where I was trying to get at this issue, I was calling it topic development, where we were, because that was my dissertation format for what kind of quality of target language use was I really looking for. It was topic development, where people in the communication were going back and forth in some way, and they were orienting towards their building talk. And so the opposite, like you were just saying that you experienced in that class in Spain, it's like I called it ask and drop. It's like, yeah, the teacher put something out there and then they drop it. And because the teacher never oriented to pay attention to what the students said there, they were just oriented towards, did they get language accuracy? Did they show vocabulary knowledge? Did they show grammar performance? Like that, they're oriented so much to that they are not building anything off of what the students said.
Yeah.
And as a teacher, we have that kind of control in the classroom, especially when we have novice learners or those with proficiency that doesn't allow them to do a lot of that kind of maintaining the conversation.
Yeah.
So it's really, I think it's mainly at that beginning novice, early intermediate level, it's mainly on the teacher to make that happen
Yeah.
rather than on the students. We have to
Uh,
show that it's important.
I think most students, it seems like everyone comes into language, teachers, students, parents, really everyone. It's like there's this default, which is, oh, it's a language class, so we're going to focus on language. And what is language? Well, it's a list, it's lists of words and some sorts of descriptions of sentence structure,
Yeah.
a list of
And
sounds.
you're not saying that is the definition of language you would want to use, but you're saying that's
No,
the default,
that's the default
right?
assumption
The
that people bring
typical.
into a
Yeah,
classroom. Yeah.
right.
And
Just want
so,
to make sure that was out there.
yeah,
Go
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. And so you know, this conversation you and I are having right now could move toward a definition of language, which Bill VanPatten's second book for ACTFL called, I think it's called Language in a Nutshell, or The Nature of Language in a Nutshell, something like
Yeah.
that.
The nature
Um,
of language, I think.
yeah,
Language acquisition in a nutshell is another book,
it's a separate one. Okay, okay. The
I
Nature of
think.
Language. Yeah. So that one's really just about the definition of language, and his whole thesis that he states at the beginning is professional teachers don't typically have a definition of the object of their teaching. We say we
Yeah.
teach language, and then we don't really have any sort of definition we can state. And then he says, let me lay out for you what the research shows, that language as a mental construct is way too
Yeah.
abstract, implicit, and complex to put in a list. Like you can't teach it directly. It's actually this really really complex thing. So actually, I don't want to go in that direction. What I want to talk about
Yeah,
instead is the
it's
history
another
of
rabbit trail.
calling. Yeah, I think it's important to mention, but a
Yeah.
communicative
And there's other
classroom.
definitions too, but
Yeah, for sure. But I don't see textbooks lay out a definition of, they don't say we define language as these lists of words and grammar. They just say, you want your students to be competent. Well, they got to start memorizing all these words and grammar, and here's some practice to do that.
yeah.
So what I want to focus on instead is what we'd call a communicative classroom or communicative language teaching, and what it means to focus on communication. And so it's useful to come back to that definition, the expression, interpretation, and sometimes negotiation of meaning in a given context. And what's more, language is purposeful, communication is purposeful. Um, if I had to delete every word in that definition to just like leave one word as the core word of that definition, I would make it meaning. Meaning is the core word in there. So we're focused on meaning. And I think if you jump outside of classrooms and say, what are people doing when they use language? They're talking about themselves. They're talking about each other. They're talking about sports games. They're making meals. They're playing sports. They're using language to do a lot of things. They're not usually focused on the language while they're doing that. They're not like, hey,
Right.
he used this verb. Hey, and even if it's like a word that matters, they wouldn't say like, hey, don't use that verb around here. They would just say like,
Yeah.
that's a specific word we don't say around here. Um, so a communicative classroom really should be one where we're focusing on meaning. That should be the definition of it. So to be the bad cop here, there's a quote from a researcher that was interviewed by Kees de Bott. And the book was published sometime in the last 20 years, but it's just a lot of interviews with different SLA, second
Oh, yeah,
language
yeah, yeah.
acquisition researchers.
Yeah, like, is that the history of
Yeah.
applied linguistics
The
thing?
history of applied linguistics. Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Okay, that needs to go in the show notes because
We'll put it in
that
the
was
show
cool.
notes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so one of them, one of the quotes was, I'm going to paraphrase again. I don't have it in front of me, but he said something like, Krashen really set back communicative language teaching because of how teachers interpreted it.
Yeah. It wasn't
So
blaming crashing, but it
no,
was
he wasn't
kind
blaming
of
Krashen, but what he was saying is that teachers took this idea of input, but then kept their same old definition of language, which is lists of words and grammar,
words.
and said,
Yeah.
oh, is this how I teach these lists of words and grammar? You're saying that's more effective? Okay, we'll do it through input. And
Yeah.
I think that this is still alive. I think that
Oh,
way of
yeah.
thinking about like, okay, so I'm teaching language. Language is going to be these words and grammar. All right. So, and people like Blaine Ray and TPRS folks would say shelter vocabulary, don't shelter grammar, which really means you're not targeting grammar either. You're not saying here's a grammar pattern. Let me try to make that happen in the input a lot. Um, Sometimes we do, but we always make it a little marginal thing, like processing instruction from Bill VanPatten's. That he made that up based on his research in input processing, does target a kind of grammatical structure. But he also
Hmm.
says it's just a little intervention. You don't make your whole teaching. You don't
Right.
sequence your teaching on it. You don't say, today we're learning this third person form, so let's flood the input with third person form. So I think it's been pretty good in the input focused teacher circles to not focus on grammar as something that we're targeting and sequencing for the learner's input and
Yeah, we're
like
trying to
expected
just
learning.
use what is necessary to get the thing done that we're doing, sort of.
Although the targeting
Hmm.
typically is focused on the language itself, where it's like, these are my target words or my target phrase, target structure, they'll call it sometimes. This is going to be the focus. And I would
Yeah.
say that also takes away from a truly communicative classroom where we're mainly focused on the kind of story or topic or student
Yeah.
or information about the world or something playful, um,
Yeah.
that I think masterful teachers don't realize that they're doing both at the same time and they're really good at it. And so
Yeah. This
really,
is
yeah.
what it reminds me of is Paul Seedhouse's thing. I've cited the book that changed my life, right? The interactional architecture of the language classroom.
Yeah,
I think I got
2004.
the title right.
Mhm.
But the idea was one of the things that he pointed out was that teachers are always constantly doing two things at once. They're always focused on the progress of their students in gaining more of this language in terms of vocabulary, in terms of grammatical knowledge and in using the language appropriately for different situations. But also focused also on the meaning of the language and what are we doing with it in the classroom at the moment. And so he claimed that those two things are always going on in the mind of the teacher, but it's because of the nature of the teacher. But you kind of want to hide whatever kind of, oh, I see this grammar thing happening here, but you don't have to call attention to it to make the students as aware as the teacher is, just by the nature of teaching.
Yeah, if you're going to be a communicative teacher, or you want to teach communicatively, then you want to hide that focus on specific grammar, specific words.
You want it to be driven by the reason you're talking to each other, or the reason you're reading something, or why you're listening to something. It's not because today we're gaining this grammar point. Or now you're gaining these words. We are learning about Ecuadorian rainforest, or, if you're reading something about that, we are finding out about each other's hobbies. We are learning about something else, like that's the purpose. And then those other things are folded in there.
And you'll see students,
because we want them to gain language, but
you'll see students kind of misunderstand that when they're new to a communicative type of teaching. And so the teacher might ask a question, and then the students repeat the question back, and the teacher goes, "No, I'm asking you a question." Like, they won't say it in these words, but my analysis of it is that the pragmatics of what's happening, the move, the action that's happening in that moment, is not the teacher requesting a repetition from the students. It's not the teacher asking students to repeat. It's the teacher asking a question that they want an answer to. And so when I think students are misunderstanding that action, that they see the teacher say something, and then the students repeat it back, and the teacher goes, no, that wasn't my intended move. That wasn't my intended action. I wasn't requesting you to repeat. I was literally asking you a question that I want an answer to. But then students will sometimes do other things where they'll say something like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I understood that." And I go, "Okay, cool. I want you to answer the question. Like, I'm literally asking you a question." And those are the kinds of things that I say explicitly in English to my American students on day one, is I say, "Hey, in this classroom, we're going to be communicating," which means when I ask you a question, I'm not trying to just show you language. That's always true. Like, everything we do in this classroom, we're always showing each other language, and we're always learning language. That is always true, but that's not the focus. A metaphor I shared with all my students this year in my little day one intro slides, like, what are we doing here? I just had a picture of a scoreboard, maybe on like a high school gym wall, maybe a basketball game's going on. And I said, if you turn on a TV and you just saw this the whole time, like just the scoreboard the whole time, we would laugh about that now. It sounds absurd. The reason is, when you watch a sports game, you're not staring at the scoreboard the whole time, and neither are the players. Like, they can't. And in this metaphor, what I'm comparing is the scoreboard is the language and the game is the communication. We need to be talking about something, or using language to do something, like build something or draw something or construct something, create something, move chairs and tables in our actual classroom, because we routinely do have to do that. Request to go to the bathroom. Those are all the things that we're going to use language to do. That's the game.
Yeah.
And only occasionally we check the scoreboard. Once in a while, we'll say, "Hey, what's that word there? Why'd they use that word there? It's hey, is this a weird grammar thing? Is this?" And students will ask that. They're like, "Why is that word there in the sentence?" And I'm like, "Oh,
and
when you put that
the
there,
best.
it's a quick little, they call it like a focus on form or a pop-up." Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's like that when the student asks, like, their attention was drawn to some kind of little bit of language there. That's the best time to talk about it, in my opinion.
And to still focus on meaning. And so like,
or times that little bit of form is going to confuse them about the meaning.
Yes.
This is going to be easily misinterpreted by them. They're going to think it means this thing. And this happens with Mandarin Chinese a lot, with these particles like le and guo and things. People with an English language learner mindset are trying to map that onto tenses, like in a European language, and Chinese doesn't work that way. And so like making sure that they're not attaching the same concept to the form of the language they're being introduced to. So but it's like, again, that's that teacher mindset where you're kind of progressing like, oh, okay, I know what a learner is going to have a little hiccup here if I don't step in. But it's not to stay on that for its own sake. It's to be able to use the language to communicate with each other.
Exactly. Yeah. And to me also like a feature of being communicative, like a part of an aspect, one of the, if you had to list like what are some of the things we're looking for when being communicative, is also being in the moment and focusing on the immediate whatever we're doing, like the immediate whatever we're talking about. It's a little chicken. Who's that?
Yeah, that's Marianne.
Marianne. Dan, tell us where you are.
I'm filming from the chicken porch today. So if you're watching on YouTube, you just saw my chicken's butt because Marianne keeps walking around behind my chair here.
Yeah.
But yeah, you might hear small chicken noises occasionally. They're out here with me.
It's our ASMR. That's our focus.
Yes.
Relaxation.
Yes, they are therapy animals. They're little sweethearts.
Yeah. Sweet. It's really common for teachers to say, hey, notice this little form thing going on here. Notice this word, or notice where the word is in the sentence, or notice the ending or this little thing added to a word. You need to really be on the lookout for that, because you're going to see that a lot in the language. And when you see it, it means this or that. I'm not going to say don't ever do that, but what I am going to say is it has some problems. It's taking away focus from the immediate topic or conversation or whatever we're doing. And second, it's often not true. With most language, you can't overgeneralize too much. And students are looking for overgeneralizations. Like they want to know the shortcuts. They want to know how to, I think it's just part of competence to be like, okay,
yeah,
whenever I see a hammer, I can use it to drive nails, right? And if you say, yeah, whenever you see a hammer, it's always to drive nails. And then later they're like, hey, why is that guy using a hammer to pull out nails? Like, oh, okay, you can also use a hammer to pull out nails. Okay. Hey, why is that person using that hammer to like hold paper down? Oh, yes, you can also use a hammer to hold paper down. Like anything we say in the moment about a word, we're like, all right, this word means this. Okay. My seniors are constantly saying words in their texts where they're saying, why is that? What's that word doing here? And I say, it has a different meaning now. It's in this context, it means this. And really part of the learning when another metaphor, I use a lot of water metaphors. So it's like, you can't stand in front of the ocean and say, why are all these waves here? What are all these waves doing here? You can, it's just useless. Like you're really wasting your time, and you're also not getting in the water. And so once you get in the water, waves are mathematically so complex and different that they're really hard to map out. Like it's really hard to just make one equation that's going to simply tell us what all ocean waves do. But people do learn to surf. They do it by being in the water. And so I tell my students this, like, we got to keep reading. We got to keep hearing it. And you're going to keep noticing weird little things happening, and you're going to get used to it. But there's a bigger general comfort you have to get into. Like you have to generally get comfortable being in the water. You have to get comfortable being in texts and listening to things and just trying to focus on meaning. You'll notice words constantly, but that's again, like the game board at a game, that shouldn't be your main focus. Your main focus should be on the game. You just glance at the game board once in a while. So
and the thing that's funny too is like they're doing that all the time with their first language or their first languages. They're not thinking about all those little things, but you get into a classroom and somehow it messes with people's minds, and they don't act the same way about it anymore. So
they kind
trying
of
to bring that back in is part of the thing. And is this can I jump in on something a little angle different? I've heard this kind of critique of folks that are like comprehensible input or teaching with comprehensible input, very CI emphasizing. This was a thing for myself when you were saying something about, I learned about this thing from Crash, and input helps people acquire language. And okay, great. So now I can just use my textbook, chapter here, and then I'll teach it through input. And I was very much that way when I was first shifting. And I think that whole idea of communicative purpose has slowly trickled into my thinking to the point that that's really unified now in the way that I'm trying to think about teaching language. And it's taken time, and it's like it makes you rework what am I going to plan for this lesson? Like, how am I going to choose what I do with my students, because I used to be able to just take it like, okay, I have this set of 3 phrases I want to get in today or something, and thinking of it in a broader way, like what are we going to do with language? What words and phrases are going to be helpful? If possible, planning in that direction.
Yeah.
Um,
I would
so
I would compare it to when I taught in Ajan this summer, the first thing that came to mind was, ooh, no grades, and the students want to be there. And these are adults who just want to sit there and be immersed in language. Okay, I don't have to plan like backward planned assessments and like lessons that are going to lead up to something for a grade. At my school, my students ask constantly, is this for a
yeah,
formative or a summative grade? What is this for again? And they just won't
yeah.
engage if they don't know what the grade is for. But in
That
Ajan, yeah,
I was going to say that is really critically important, so that like even if as a teacher you're thinking through like we're learning about XYZ thing, we're going to use the language to do it, or we're going to create this story together because we enjoy using the language that way, and then we're going to have these words and phrases come up, or so
yeah,
you can tell students that they're going to gain language skills and
yeah,
proficiency from doing these things.
yeah,
You can balance that out with like we're using the language for this purpose, and through that you're
yeah.
going to gain XYZ. So,
Yeah, yeah. I have some sort of lesson, almost brain break kind of things. Like I have a video of a guy in Wanzhou, Chongqing in China eating kaoyu. It's this like barbecued fish that's covered in like spicy oils and all kinds of good stuff.
uh,
And the students asked like, okay, what is this for? And I said, everything that's in our lesson slides that we just chat about, like a video or some photos or something, you're gonna need those for your poster presentation that's coming up in a couple of weeks. And then they're like, okay. So it's like
yeah.
it's
So
not
they buy
focused on
in.
language. Yeah, it's not focused on language, but it is showing like purpose. And
Hmm.
I think it's the institutional context that we're in that I often think about like if I went to a yoga class, I'd want to stay on topic. It's like what is it, what are we doing? And if they said, "Oh, we're just going to sit off to the side and just chat today and drink tea, but no yoga today," I'd be like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah, I'm here for that.
I'm spending my valuable time here. I want to focus on the things that we're doing." So they want to know about the grades. They want to know about
Hmm.
how everything connects. And so that's fair. In Ajan, I just planned each day to talk about film industries in mainland China, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and look at a lot of maps and reenact some film clips. And
Hmm.
I did not plan a single word in advance. I did have a poster from the Portland Star Talk that was left over with the question words. Non
Oh
gave it
yeah,
to me. I'll fold it up, and I was like, "Cool, thanks. That'll save me a minute making a poster."
yeah, yeah.
Other than the question words, I had no pre-planned word. And really, what I was doing instead of saying, "Okay, non-targeted means I'll just have whatever words and I'll make those the targets." No, I literally was focused on building stories, looking at film clips. Did the language get super duper unsheltered? A little bit the first day, but I was mainly recycling the same words over and over. Not because I was saying, "Hey, I got to make this word repeat." So I was never inspired
Hmm.
about what to say next by looking at a word on the board. I never
Uh-huh.
said, what else can we talk about that'll use this word? To me, that wouldn't
For
be,
its own sake, or I mean, because I know you mentioned how students really felt that after that first day, you did reuse a lot of vocabulary, but like you weren't consciously
so
doing it. It just
no,
that's
no.
the
So
nature of what you were talking about.
every day was repeated. It was just on a different film industry. And we were doing such simple things and talking about the same topics every single day. All 5 days, it was the
Uh-huh.
exact, it was like, okay, who's that actor? Who's this actor? Does this person like actors? Does that person like actors? Who's this person's mother? Who's this person's father? Those it just emerged because the students brought it up. They're like, "That's his mom," and I was like, "Okay, Shatada Mama." Okay, so it was really student driven, and we were talking about the same topics every day and the same ideas every day, the same
Yeah.
information every day. And so that at the end of the first day, the students said, that is kind of a lot of vocab." And I said, "Don't worry, we have 4 more days of the same exact topics that are mostly going to recycle this." And by the end of the second day, they said, "Wow, I'm actually surprised you were able to reuse the same words on the
Yeah.
board." And I said, "It's because we were talking about the same things."
Yeah.
But again, I never looked up at my word wall and said, let's see how we can make that word repeat. I
Uh-huh.
never ever did that. All I did was I'd look at the picture and I'd say, Tasha Shay, and I point to my words that were already up there because the first day we talked about Tasha Shay means who is he?
Hmm.
Um, and so I'd be like, okay, who is she? Okay. Well, what's his name? Okay, And so we would just think through pictures and think through scenes. But they pointed out that like the words added on the second day were like a third of the number of the words we used the first day. We mostly reused the words from the first day. By the
Yeah.
third day, we had very few new words added. And
Yeah.
by the fourth day, it was like one or two new words added, but we were just really like reusing the same words over and over. But
Right.
it was
Cool.
really like what I call narrow topic development. And it's
Hmm.
just instead of talking about something new, let's just talk about something similar. And we keep talking about something similar and find something else similar to talk about. When you do that, you just naturally can. And I would have sentences that came to my mind where I'd think, ooh, that's a lot of words we haven't used yet. But then I would think, can I say this, more, quote unquote, more simply? Um,
Hmm.
and so then, and I might occasionally look over to my word wall and say, oh, we can use those words to talk about this. So again, it was led by what we want to talk about. It wasn't led by language.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's powerful to be able to do that. And I think sometimes one of the motivational pieces, and to call out to another podcast, Liam Printer's podcast, The Motivated Classroom, has a lot of great stuff on self-determination theory, and the theoretical perspective he uses to look at motivational things. So he says like there's um, competence, autonomy, and then relatedness are three aspects of things that are very motivating. And so if you're trying to motivate your students about learn the language because you can do this thing, I just kind of sigh inside, like not everybody cares about that thing. But if they can be hooked in by feeling a sense of relatedness to the people in the room and to the cultures that you're introducing them to through the language, if they can feel a sense of competence that they're gaining in their language ability and they can do the things that you're asking them to do, just a little challenge and they can do it. And if they're given some choice and some say in how things are going to progress rather than just having be told everything that they have to do, then they're going to probably feel quite motivated. I feel like that's another aspect of communicative purpose is benefits.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need a communicative purpose to acquire language. We just need to comprehend language, maybe. But I think socially and to build buy-in with students and to make a classroom function, I sure think communicative purpose is really important and helpful because it allows us perhaps to overcome that student that's not motivated by language learning for its own sake, which is most of our students probably.
Yeah. I see motivation as sort of the big gate that it sort of gates attention. It's like if you're not motivated at all, then you have some text in front of you or some audio playing or some conversation going on and you just tune out. And if you're not trying to connect form and meaning, like you need the attention to be able to pay attention to what's going on and what the meaning is. And you're just not really getting comprehensible input if you're not paying attention.
If
And
there's
to
no
me,
perception.
motivation is that like gate on that. It's like if you
Mhm.
can, and then nothing motivates like success is another like
Yeah, Susie
simple
Gross's
slogan for that.
statement about that. Mhm.
So, yeah, yeah. So about present versus future, when teachers say you're going to need this in the future, you don't know that. You don't know what they
Yeah.
need in the future, but we can be in the present, and that's something we do have control over. Well,
Yep.
okay. Well, let's end it here. I have been Reed Riggs.
Yep. I'm Diane Neubauer.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks.